Hello everyone, my name is Arjun Karanam, and today I'm going to be showing you my Unit 2 AP Human Geography review video. In this video, the subject of review is going to be the transition models. The transition models are the demographic transition model, the epidemiological transition model, and the migration transition model. So let's look at it. What are they? All three of these are models that use the statistic of a development of a country in order to show and predict certain aspects of a country. A migration transition model uses development in order to predict and show migration patterns and trends within a country. The demographic transition model uses development in order to predict and display the population growth of a country, while the epidemiological transition model uses development to show and predict major causes of death in a country. The migration transition model and the epidemiological transition model are based off the DTM, and they use the stages defined in the DTM as a basis for their results. So now let's look into each one a little bit more specifically. The demographic transition model. It has 4 stages, and a 5th one is currently being explored. It predicts the transition or changes in births, deaths, and the rate of natural increase of a country, and it uses the statistics of crude birth rate, crude death rate, and the rates of natural increase. Let's have a brief overview of all 5 stages in the demographic transition model. And since the demographic transition model serves as a kind of blueprint for the other transition models, we'll also be looking at the development levels associated with each stage. In stage 1, we see countries as not very industrialized, and the people living in these countries usually survive by using subsistence farming. And if we look specifically into the demographic transition model, the growth we see here is usually low growth, and this is because a country in stage 1 has a high crude birth rate and a high crude death rate, and these two tend to cancel each other out. When we look at stage 2, countries in stage 2 have development levels of technologies are improving as well as the general condition of the population. In stage 2 countries, we're seeing an improved food supply and improved sanitation. Also, stage 2 countries tend to introduce basic health care. This last point is important when we look at the epidemiological transition model. When we look at growth of stage 2 countries, we see high growth. This is because the crude death rate of a stage 2 country falls off extremely rapidly, but the crude birth rate stays roughly the same as before, and only starts to decline near the end of the stage. So when we look at the graph of this, which we'll see later in the PowerPoint, we'll see that while the crude death rate declines, the crude birth rate will stay roughly the same as before, leaving this huge gap for the population to grow rapidly. When we look at stages 3 and 4, the development levels we associate with these countries are increased wages, urbanization, the increased status of women, as well as these countries tend to become more and more industrialized. When we look at the growth, stage 3 countries will exhibit a moderate growth, while stage 4 countries will exhibit low growth. This is because low CBR, low crude birth rate, and low crude death rate start to meet each other once again, and this is where we come into the concept of zero population growth. And when we look at the hypothetical 5th stage, the development levels are similar to those seen in stage 4 and stage 5. This is women have a high status in society, equal to men. We see these countries highly industrialized. Some examples of this are Japan and South Korea. These countries are highly industrialized in the world and are said to be in the hypothetical stage 5. And these countries are also highly urbanized and actually going through counter-urbanization, which we'll talk about later in the PowerPoint. And in terms of the demographic transition model, the growth we see in these countries are a negative population growth, and this is when this birth rate declines below the death rate. And we see this concept of a grading population, where there are many more elderly people than younger people. And then this causes a high dependency ratio, which brings in all sorts of trouble factors into the country. And so here, if we look at this graph, we can see that in stage 1, the death rate and the birth rate are fluctuating. At one point the death rate's higher, at one point the birth rate's higher, meaning that the total population, as you can see by the red line, stays roughly the same. But in stage 2, when the death rate falls, but the birth rate only starts to taper at the end of the stage, we see that there's a giant population increase. We see this increase continue into stage 3, though not as drastically as before. At stage 4, we see this start to taper off as the CBR and CDR start to meet each other again. And then at stage 5, we see the population leveling off and even dropping as the CBR falls below the CDR. The next model we're going to talk about is the epidemiological transition model. And as I said before, the epidemiological transition model follows the stages of the DTM. It uses the stages defined demographic transition model as a basis to show and predict the major causes of death in relation to the development of a country. If we look at this, stage 1, the cause of death in a stage 1 country in the epidemiological transition model is poor sanitary condition as the country slowly develops, and these people do not have the knowledge to combat their diseases. And in countries who are in stage 1, the young primarily die due to high infant mortality rates. When we look at stage 2, we see the main causes of death being urbanization is starting to happen, and when this happens, we see cities starting to form, and these cities quickly become overcrowded, and this causes people to come into close quarters with each other. And when people do this, they still do not have too much of a thorough knowledge when it comes to combating diseases and how to effectively guard yourself against these diseases. And these diseases spread rapidly through these crowded cities, and these people do not have much information on how to successfully defend themselves against these. When we look at stages 3 and 4, the major causes of death are people are living longer at this point. We're coming to a stage in humanity where people are living longer than they've ever done before. And because of this, diseases are arising that we didn't even know existed, because people simply didn't live this long in our history. And examples of this are arthritis. When we look at stage 5, the cause of deaths are stronger, more adapted strands of disease become to emerge. Because as many scientists have shown, when a virus fails at its intended job, just like humans, a virus will adapt and will become stronger and develop stronger strands in order to do its effective job of taking over our cells. And these are diseases we thought we had cured a long time ago, but are now developing stronger strands and are now coming to get us again. And an example of this is the swine flu. And so, if we look back at this graph, we can see the epidemiological transition model uses the same stages as the demographic transition model to explain its causes of death. And so, our final transition model is a model of migration transition. And this model was created by Zielinski, and like the epidemiological transition model, it uses stages of development to find the DTM to base its conclusions, and each stage of the model offers different motives for people to migrate. In stage 1, why do people move? And in stage 1 countries, we see people move for nomadic movement, and this is because people look for shelter and food. These are generally groups of people who move north or south based on the time of year. And this is a topic of debate, but many people agree that no countries are actually in this stage. Only certain groups of people, only certain primitive groups of people are in this stage. When we go to stage 2, we have why do people move in stage 2 of the migration transition? We have to look into certain factors. In stage 2 is when urbanization begins, as we saw in our development. And so when urbanization begins, we see more and more people being born, and this ties into the demographic transition model. So at this point, you should be seeing that all of these 3 different types of transition models kind of tie into each other and affect each other and affect the properties of each one. So in stage 2, as we see in the DTM, we see a high population increase, and when we see this high population of increase, more and more resources are being used. And when more and more people come onto the earth, less land is available per person. And so people who live in stage 2 countries move to lands of abundant resources. In stages 3 and 4, people move interregionally, and this is because the country is already in a good spot. The people don't really need to move outside of their current location. They already have, generally, economic incentives that they want, and they generally don't need to move far. And so we see many people move to rural to urban in stages 3 and 4, as marked by our world's recent milestone of hitting 51% urban population. And as time progresses, you will see suburbanization and counter-urbanization. Suburbanization and counter-urbanization are when people migrate from cities back to suburban areas and sometimes even rural areas. And this is because of the concept of counter streams.